4:45 a.m., Black Sea, southern Crimea. 20 meters off the shoreline, the water erupts, not with a warning shot, not with a missile plume, but with a white-hot concussion that turns a $100 million Russian logistics base into a cloud of burning inventory before the first guard even understands what he's looking at. Concrete peels outward, fuel tanks blossom into fireballs, and somewhere inside that expanding wall of smoke, a billion-dollar air defense dream realizes it just got humiliated by something thinner than human hair. If Russia's electronic Iron Dome really worked, then this base should still exist. If their radar really saw everything, then nothing this small should have gotten this close. But if you're watching carefully, and you should, this wasn't an accident. This was timing. This was patience. This was Ukraine waiting until Moscow looked north and forgot the South existed. Stay focused, because while Russian commanders were busy flexing toward Greenland, congratulating themselves on billion-dollar jammers and hypersonic buzzwords, something cheap, quiet, and brutally physical was already drifting into position. No radio signals, no noise to jam, just a silent line stretching through seawater, carrying crystal-clear video straight into a Ukrainian operator's hands. Time to impact was never minutes. It was seconds, and the Russians never even looked down. For years, Russia sold this stretch of Crimea as untouchable, not defended untouchable. A place wrapped in overlapping bubbles of confidence and cash, where Nebo-M radar arrays scanned hundreds of miles of sky, where Pantsir S-1 batteries sat alert with 30mm cannons already warmed, and where Krasuka 4 and Pole 2-1 electronic warfare trucks flooded the airwaves so aggressively that even friendly radios struggled to breathe. This was the brochure version of modern warfare, the kind shown at arms expos with dramatic lighting and confident smiles. From the Russian perspective, nothing small survived here. Drones relied on radio links. Radios died in jamming storms. Therefore, drones died too. It was simple, elegant logic and dangerously outdated. Commanders trusted the math because the math had always worked. Every threat they imagined came screaming through the air at speed, glowing on radar, begging to be intercepted by missiles that cost more than suburban homes. Stay with me, because this entire fortress, every radar sweep, every encrypted command link, every smug assumption was built to fight signals, not physics. And the moment you confuse those two, your billion-dollar shield quietly turns into an expensive stage prop, waiting for the wrong kind of audience. What made this location irresistible wasn't geography, it was accounting. Behind those concrete walls sat a logistics hub designed to keep Russia's southern war machine breathing. Lancet drone warheads stacked beside aviation fuel, spare guidance units sealed in storage, all waiting to be shipped north. By conservative estimates, this wasn't just a base. It was a balance sheet worth over $100 million, parked 20 meters from the sea like a luxury car left idling. Above it, the Nebo-M radar stood tall, advertised as capable of spotting hypersonic threats from hundreds of miles away. Pantsir crews trusted it, commanders trusted it. And because of that trust, no one imagined danger arriving slowly, hugging the surface, looking less like an attack and more like harmless ocean clutter. Russia didn't underdefend this place. It overinvested in the wrong layer. But wait, here's the lethal detail most people miss. When you pack explosives, fuel, and command infrastructure this tightly together, you don't build resilience, you build a single failure point. One precise intrusion is enough to turn an entire logistics hub into a very loud financial mistake. 4:45 a.m. hasn't even cooled yet when the first mistake locks itself into the Russian command picture. On radar screens, something flickers low and slow near the shoreline, barely a whisper of movement, the kind junior operators are trained to ignore. Nebo-M flags it as surface clutter, salt spray, wave noise, nothing worth waking a colonel over. And that decision, made in under 2 seconds, is the hinge the entire night swings on. Because Ukraine isn't rushing, it's waiting. A Magura V5 drifts forward like debris, its profile wrong enough to confuse, but boring enough to dismiss, riding the blind seam between radar angles while Russian eyes stay glued north, where expensive threats are supposed to come from. No radio chatter follows it, no control signals to jam. The air is screaming with Krasuka 4 interference, Pole 2-1 pouring static across the spectrum like gasoline on a fire, yet the target doesn't flinch. To Russian logic, that means it's already dead. Stay focused, because this is the genius detail. Ukraine doesn't fight the electronic storm, it walks around it. Inside the Magura, 4 Queen Hornet FP-5 drones sit quietly, each tethered by a fiber optic line thin as fishing thread, coiled patiently like a promise. No emissions, no lag, just physics. When the launch hatch opens 20 meters from shore, the drones don't announce themselves, they simply appear, slipping into the port like insects nobody planned for. Time remaining, 38 seconds. The first drone climbs just enough to be noticed. Pantsir crews finally get their dopamine hit, locking on and firing a missile that costs more than the drone's entire squadron. Impact, cheers, high fives. Somewhere, a Russian operator smiles because the system worked. But while they're celebrating the kill, 2 more drones split wide, moving wrong, drifting low, dragging their invisible threads through seawater and concrete shadows. But wait, here's the trap closing. The jammers are at full power, radios are blind, orders lag. And still the drones keep flying, smooth and deliberate, feeding perfect 1080p video straight back to Ukraine. This isn't a swarm trying to overwhelm defenses. It's a pickpocket working a crowd, letting noise and confidence do most of the work. By the time Russian commanders realize they're not fighting signals anymore, the decoy phase is already over, and the real lesson is about to begin. By 4:52 a.m., confidence has fully replaced caution. In the Russian command room, the mood shifts from alert to amused. A drone was shot down. The Pantsir crew is already replaying the hit in their heads. A clean intercept, textbook performance, proof that all the money spent still buys applause. Someone jokes that Ukraine just burned another toy. Another operator reaches for coffee. No one asks why the jamming hasn't forced the remaining contacts to tumble into the sea. This is where arrogance becomes operational. The Krasuka 4 trucks crank even harder, flooding the spectrum until friendly radios hiss and choke. But the drones don't wobble, they don't drift, they don't lose altitude. To Russian eyes, this looks like panic machines flying straight because their brains are already fried. The wrong conclusion lands instantly. These aren't threats anymore, they're leftovers. Stay with me, because this is the fatal misunderstanding. Ukraine isn't probing reactions, it's measuring habits. Every second the drones stay alive tells the operators exactly where Russian attention is focused and where it isn't. One drone pulls slightly upward, just enough to be tempting. Another hesitates near the breakwater, pretending to search for an exit. The defenders read this as confusion. It isn't, it's choreography. But here's the twist the planners missed. While the Russians argue about whether to fire another missile, the most important drone isn't attacking at all. It's watching. It studies turret rotation speed. It notes how long it takes for commands to propagate through a jammed network. It learns that celebration creates delay. That delay creates space. And space, in modern warfare, is lethal. If you were the commander here, what would you do next? Burn another $1 million missile on a target that looks already dead? Or wait and trust the system? The Russians choose trust. They always do. And in that choice, the trap finishes setting itself. Quiet and invisible, while the most expensive defenses in the harbor prepare to be outsmarted by something they've already dismissed as a joke. 4:55 a.m. The celebration hasn't even faded when the geometry of the fight changes. The Russian operators think they're watching debris drift and machines die, but the camera feed tells a different story, one they never get to see. The final drone slides out of the shadow line, low enough to kiss the water, steady enough to look unreal. Its fiber line paying out smoothly behind it like a magician's silk scarf pulled from nowhere. Time remaining, 27 seconds. Inside the Pantsir battery, the turret slews again, slower this time. Ammunition counters tick down. Someone hesitates. Someone asks for confirmation that jamming is still active. It is screaming, blinding, saturating everything that relies on the air to think. The drone doesn't care. It isn't listening to the air. It's listening through glass. Stay focused, because this is the moment Russia's entire doctrine trips over itself. The drone doesn't attack the base. It doesn't chase the warehouse. It climbs just enough to put the radar dish in frame. The circular eye that promised safety now filling the screen in perfect, lag-free clarity. No blur, no static, just physics delivering truth at the speed of light. Time to impact, 12 seconds. The operator nudges the controls. The drone accelerates. The Pantsir fires, but too late, too narrow, reacting to a problem it was never designed to have. The shaped charge hits dead center. Metal collapses inward. Electronics flash once and go dark. In a single heartbeat, the harbor's most expensive bodyguard becomes blind, deaf, and very quiet. 4:56 a.m. That silence is catastrophic. With the radar gone, the harbor loses coherence. Orders fragment. The Project 21980 patrol boat surges forward on instinct, trying to swat the Magura before it can retreat. It never gets the chance. Another drone breaks formation, drops low, and punches straight through the cockpit glass. The boat slews sideways, engines screaming, crew stunned by the sudden realization that rifles are not a defense plan. Time remaining, 6 seconds. The final drone doesn't rush. It glides through an open hangar door left swinging by fleeing soldiers, its camera drinking in the sight. Lancet warheads stacked beside aviation fuel, guidance crates inches from catastrophe. The operator centers the frame. Steady hands, no interference, no doubt. Time to impact. 3, 2, 1. The trigger is pulled, and the harbor inhales. The explosion doesn't behave like a movie fireball. It behaves like math catching up with bad planning. The shape charge initiates first. A focused jet of superheated metal punching through containment before the shockwave even finishes forming. And that breach is all the oxygen the base needs to betray itself. Fuel vapor ignites. Stored warheads sympathetically detonate. Pressure stacks faster than concrete can flex. In a confined space, blast waves don't escape. They ricochet. They reflect off walls, ceilings, steel racks, and parked vehicles, folding back into themselves until pressure multiplies instead of dissipates. This is overpressure doing compound interest. Windows don't shatter outward, they implode. Doors don't fly open, they vanish. The hangar roof lifts for a fraction of a second, long enough for the fireball to breathe, then collapses back down into the inferno like a lid slammed shut. Stay with me, because this is where physics humiliates doctrine. The secondary detonations arrive milliseconds later, not as separate blasts, but as a continuous tearing sound, a fabric-ripping roar that turns equipment, ammo, and human confidence into airborne fragments. Shrapnel accelerates faster than most rifle rounds. Steel beams twist like soft clay. Shockwaves race along the ground, leap into nearby structures, and knock men flat who never saw a target, never fired a shot. Outside, the sea reacts last. Water absorbs the blast, then throws it back. A pressure dome rises, collapses, and sends a rolling wave slamming into the shoreline, scattering debris and bodies with equal indifference. Thermal bloom spikes, then drops, leaving behind a signature so bright it saturates sensors miles away. For a brief moment, the night looks like noon. And somewhere far too late, a Russian commander orders an Iskander launch. The missile arcs beautifully, expensively. It lands in empty water, detonating against nothing of value because the Magura is already drifting away, silent, intact, carrying only a spool of spent fiber and a lesson written in fire. Now step back, because this is where the fire stops being emotional and becomes humiliatingly financial. Ukraine didn't bring jets. It didn't risk pilots. It didn't launch a single missile that required a press conference or congressional briefing. The entire strike package, a Magura V5, 4 Queen Hornet FP5 drones, and a spool of fiber optic cable lands around $250,000. Planned once, executed once, no reruns required. Now flip the ledger. One logistics hub erased. Over $100 million in stored warheads, fuel, guidance units, and infrastructure vaporized in under 10 seconds. Add a Pantsir S, 1 battery turned into scrap metal, a Project 21980 patrol boat disabled, wasted interceptor missiles fired at decoys, and an Iskander launch that hit nothing but seawater. Conservatively, this night costs Russia north of $150 million. Realistically, it's worse because what died here wasn't just hardware, it was credibility. From this moment on, every Russian commander in Crimea has to assume the impossible is possible. Jamming no longer guarantees safety. Radar no longer means awareness. Expensive systems no longer scare cheap attackers. Every harbor, every base, every warehouse near water now comes with a new question they can't answer. What if it's wired? What if the next threat isn't shouting through the air but whispering through glass? This is the strategic checkmate most people miss. Ukraine didn't win by overwhelming force. It won by invalidating assumptions. Russia can spend billions building taller electronic walls, but if a $20 cable can walk straight through them, then every future ruble buys less protection than the last. So here's the question, and only people who truly understand modern warfare can answer it. If you're Russia, do you spend more money, or do you admit the game just changed? And if you're Ukraine, why would you ever play fair again? Tell me in the comments.